10B, receive a quarterly financial report as of March 31st, 2010 for the 2009-10 General Fund, Special Revenue Funds, Enterprise Funds, Redevelopment Agency, and Capital Improvement Program budgets. Finance Director.
Good evening, Mayor Rain and members of the City Council. This is a presentation of our quarterly update financial reports. Some items of notes. We met this morning with our sales tax consultants, and in reviewing the revenues of this past quarter, it actually is flat compared to a year ago. Transient occupancy taxes have shown some signs of improvements, albeit for the entire year it's still down compared to a year ago. And lastly, a very significant item for the redevelopment agency, there's a potential grab of $1.99 million that may take effect as on May 10th. This is pending a court ruling that's going to be due on May 4th. By the way, if I can step back, this item is comprehensive in reviewing all the funds, including the redevelopment agency. So my oversight in not clarifying that up front. Some other economic data. What this slide shows is are the unemployment rates, both from a macro level and a local level. And as we can tell looking at the slide, unemployment rates are still very high compared historically, and even compared to a year ago, they are across the board higher than it was just a year ago. So the situation obviously is still a little bit tenuous, even though there may be a recovery, some green shoots. It's still having some impacts on certainly the local government level in terms of all revenue streams. General fund revenues. Here, these are the top 5 revenue categories for the general fund. As we can tell, looking at where the budget is, the amended budget, compared to where we are for the 9 months. For sales taxes, we're at $3.3 million compared to the amended budget of $5 million, obviously at around 2/3. There's a little bit of lag time in terms of sales tax, but in looking at, again, in having the conversation with our sales tax consultants this morning, there's a little bit of a positive sign in terms that was flat compared to the prior 2 quarters, where sales taxes were actually showing declines compared to a year ago. Property taxes, the timing of the property taxes, we get the second installment in April, therefore the March numbers do not reflect that second installment. VLF is the next category. Likewise, the same as property tax, we actually get the second portion of what is called a VLF in lieu as part of property tax payments, and therefore it looks like it's a little distorted there at only the 50% level. And then the last 2 categories, charges for services and use of money. Charges for services, they're right at the 3/4 marks, if I may, and the use of money and property, that's a combination of interest earnings that we have and rentals that we have for the agency.
Can I interrupt?
Yes. Sorry.
With the fact that you stated the lack of reporting or the lag in reporting, is it safe to compare this year with last year, or is that skewed also?
In terms of each one of these categories?
Yes. Yes.
I think it's comparable to compare them to last year. So yes, that very right-hand column is the same 9 months a year ago. Okay. So it gives us a little bit of a basis in seeing where the trends are a year ago versus what we are looking at for the last 9 months of the current fiscal year.
Okay, thank you.
Looking at revenues at a departmental level, we have the various departments starting with PD, engineering, planning, building, recreation, fire, and library. And overall, we're at 70%. There are a couple of departments which are a little bit below, but overall, I think we're still on track to hit the targets by year end. There's a little bit of catch-up, a little bit of seasonality involved in some of these revenues. Some of it is because of the accruals, the timing of the revenues. By the time we receive it in April is actually for part of March collections, if I may. So a little bit of accruals that kick into place that distorts these numbers a little bit. But again, comparing this current year's 9 months to last year, 3.2 million, 3.1 million, they're very comparable. Now we go to the general fund expenditures, and these are the various departments. I've kind of ranked them in descending order in terms of budgets. And the storyline on here, if I may, is that overall the general fund for the city, we're right at the 75% mark, but it still means that we need to continue to be diligent in monitoring and controlling our expenses so that we meet the budget targets, the amended budget targets of the 31 million and change there.
I'm sorry, excuse me.
Yes.
Could you go back? Could you explain for those watching when they see non-departmental at 120%, what that means?
Yes, the non-departmental, what those charges are typically, they get redistributed to the various departments. It's a little bit distorted here. Yes, it's $92,000 versus the $77,000. We're looking at about a $15,000 increase compared to the budget. Last year was $155,000. I don't have the actual date breakdown of the $92,000, but it's certainly something I will be monitoring, for the next report there.
Thank you.
So moving on to non-general fund funds, if I may. The redevelopment agency, we have, again, the revenues are the tax increment dollars. Therefore, the revenues associated with those come as part of the property tax revenues. And again, they're due in April. So therefore, a little bit of a distortion in terms of where we are actually for the first 9 months versus the entire budget. The low mod income is a requirement that we set aside 20%. So the same rationale applies in terms of where revenues are. And then we have 4 major categories of internal service funds. Our self-insurance fund, building and facilities maintenance, central garage, and technology. As you can tell, across the board, all of these are at exactly 75%. The reason that is the case is that these are charges to the various departments within general fund. So it's an accounting entry that we do that basically has a linear apportionment, if I may, of those revenues. And then finally, the 4 enterprise funds that we have with the city being the cable TV, the wastewater enterprise fund, the water and the stormwater enterprise funds. And again, looking at the rightmost column compared to the second column there, they're pretty much comparable to last year's performance. On the revenue side, we're actually outperforming versus last year, and part of it obviously is because of the rate increases that kicked into effect in the various categories there. So that concludes the presentation in terms of the quarterly update. I can take any questions at this time.
Any questions of staff?
Yes. The $1.99 million
Yes.
of redevelopment that the state will withhold, I guess it won't
Take.
They'll keep.
Yes.
How does that affect our the redevelopment expenditures?
Yeah, it means that there will be less money for redevelopment to provide for economic stimulus.
Yeah.
I think it's been said publicly by many agencies. The states in the state's quest to balance their budget, what they're doing is really counter to what is really needed. I think from the perspective that economic development, redevelopment agencies stimulate the economy. It's public-private partnerships that help generate jobs and growth. But the fact that they're taking monies from agencies really then reduces our ability to do just that.
Okay. But it's not going to affect any of our ongoing programs that are coming up. It's just going to slow down our growth.
Yes, for our agency, yes, there's no impact that it actually means that programs actually stop or projects actually get stopped.
Okay.
If I could elaborate on that a little bit, despite the finance director's statements, which are correct, this is a serious issue for redevelopment agencies up and down the state, and including San Bruno's. We have the unique situation in that the San Bruno Redevelopment Agency is still relatively young. As the agency board is aware, revenue receipts into the redevelopment agency via tax increment have only within the past about 3 years exceeded the costs of operating the agency. So the accumulation of a fund balance, if you will, that is available to provide bigger scale projects is really only beginning to emerge for the for the redevelopment agency in San Bruno. As such, it's a future, it limits our future capacity as opposed to being an immediate, because we have in fact generated tax increment above those that are necessary for day-to-day operations, and because we have not yet undertaken, as most more mature agencies have, undertaken significant larger scale redevelopment projects. Because we have not yet had the opportunity to do that, we accidentally end up in the situation of not compromising any of those plans already in place. It's our future plans for things like build out, realization of the dream that the transit corridors plan, that vision that it is developing, and other similar projects. I just want to make one additional small comment, and that is that to add insult to injury, the state is not withholding this from receipts. It's actually will be required, if the court ruling goes against redevelopment agencies, we'll actually be required to write them a check, which is kind of adds a little insult to injury.
Let's get off of that subject. It's interesting that I've never seen the unemployment rates, especially for San Bruno. Is there any more that you can offer as far as what that 8.5% represents?
Yeah, I think the Employment Development Agencies gather statistics, both locally, obviously, and regionally. These are numbers right off of their, I don't know the specific methodology that they employ in calculating that rate for, local agencies. It's my understanding that it's a combination of payroll data and other sources of data that they get. But it's information that's actually available at the Employment Development website there.
And any indication from your knowledge as to what areas of our town are most heavily affected? I can only speculate, but I really don't have any solid data that's pinpoints geographically within the city what areas are most impacted by the unemployment. Thank you.
Through the chair. I know you were saying on May 4th, going back to the topic we wanted to get off, on May 4th that there'll be a ruling from the court, and obviously it's already been ruled once that they couldn't take the money, and the mayor and I went to a meeting in Foster City with the Assemblyman Hill and somebody from the budget office, but the impartial, and they weren't counting on it, but they weren't saying it wasn't going to happen or isn't. That's not up to them, of course. My concern is, obviously, if they do lose and they don't get to take our 1.9 and everybody else's, and I was talking to a colleague down south, and they basically going to have to write them more money than what they have in the account. So it's unfortunate. But if they don't, I wonder what the state may have to do to come back to balance their budget. So I know in your report you're very optimistic about hopefully there's no more takeaways, but based on May 4th, to me, could be good and bad, and it'll be hard to predict. But I'm also wondering how you see us on June 30th, when that date comes up, which will be here before we know it, right, how we're going to look as far as the budget is concerned, as far as coming out in the plus, even though I know we were working on reductions in staffing components. But how do you perceive us faring on June 30th as far as the overall budget once it's done and set?
Yeah, I feel relatively comfortable. Obviously, we have 2+ months still to go. I feel relatively comfortable that we'll be able to hit the revised budget numbers that has been presented to City Council. Again, a little bit of green shoots out there that indicates that, some improvement. I think the construction industry is still very problematic. Development, construction, any revenues relating to that, planning and building vis-a-vis, is going to continue to be challenged. Retail sales, because San Bruno is so heavily reliant on retail sales, the fact that there's been some sense of improvement there leads me to believe that maybe the worst is behind us, that we'll see some positive stabilization. I wouldn't say growth yet, for that area. We also see, as I indicated earlier, some positive trends in terms of TOT. We have obviously, with the passage back in November of the increase of the TOT tax by 2 percentage points, that's going to help. Some positive signs which are steering me to the belief that we will be able to hit the amended budget targets.
Thank you.
Any other questions of Ed? All right, thank you very much.